To kick us off, I'm going to ask Virginia Means, who is an HR consultant and is also on the SHRM Atlanta Advisory Board. Ask her to come up, and she's going to introduce Cheryl. And then after Cheryl speaks, we have one more speaker. Ash Merchant from Aon Hewitt is going to come up and introduce Bill Ostan. Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy, and good morning, everyone. I'm grateful to have the distinct honor of introducing Cheryl Bachelder this morning. I had the pleasure of getting to know her a couple of years ago, and something you may find interesting, her parents raised 4 CEOs. Impressive, really impressive. But as Chief Executive Officer of AFC Enterprises, Cheryl is known for her crisp strategic thinking, guest-focused operations, consistent financial performance, and the development of leaders and teams. She joined AFC Enterprises in November of 2007 after serving as an active board member for a year. She brings more than 3 decades of experience in brand building, operations, and public company management at organizations like KFC, Domino's, Gillette, RJR Nabisco, and Procter & Gamble. At Popeyes, Cheryl promptly established a roadmap for results. The 4 key focus areas were to build a brand, run great restaurants, grow restaurant profits, and ramp up new restaurant growth. This strategic framework has led to focused initiatives that have built market share and improved guest ratings by over 20 percentage points. In addition to increasing restaurant margins by over 200 basis points in just 3 years. That's some results. The improvement in restaurant performance has led to accelerated growth for new units, both in the U.S. and internationally. She's delivered 4 years of results to shareholders, meeting or exceeding expectations every single year. Today, Popeye's system-wide revenues are at $1.9 billion, over 2,000 restaurants in 25 countries, over 300 franchisees, and more than 60,000 restaurant employees. It's a nice-sized organization. Cheryl creates work environments where people can do their best work. She believes in a passionate, purposeful approach to work where focus on coaching and developing people to be leaders with competence and character is of utmost importance. Guided by servant leadership, she builds a highly collaborative team environment and big ambitions for the enterprise, not for the individuals. A Christ-like attribute indeed. This year, Cheryl's been recognized as Leader of the Year by the Women's Food Service Forum and received the highest industry award, the Silver Plate, in the quick service restaurant sector, presented by the International Food Manufacturers Association. Cheryl holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration and an MBA in Finance and Marketing from the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University. She's married to Chris, and they have 3 daughters, ages 26, 20, and 18. Cheryl has a powerful message to share with us this morning. It's about her spiritual journey with Christ. It hasn't always been easy, but in her words, it's been remarkable. Please join me in a warm welcome for Cheryl Bachelder.
Hey, good morning to all of you. I'm particularly honored to be up at this hour in the morning with all of you. I don't know, maybe it comes with the restaurant business, but morning's not my strong suit. So I admire you. You are bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this morning, and those of you looking for a challenge at this hour of the morning, I'm all for you. So I pray that this morning will be a blessing to each and every one of you. I pray that it might only bring honor and glory to God. I've chosen a topic this morning, and it is this: serving is serious business. I think God is very serious about you and me and how we serve Him in the workplace. God's put this topic on my heart and kind of parked me there for about 10 years. And I think this is the reason. God is short-staffed in the workplace. As Christians, we're spending most of our waking hours at work, yet we tend to talk about our faith only on Sundays. Meanwhile, God is disturbed by the lack of faith, character, and competence from Monday through Friday. He wants to talk to us about it. He wants us to know that our Christian walk, or lack thereof, has huge implications for today and for generations to come. Max Stackhouse, a professor of Reformed theology at Princeton University, gives us this challenging and provocative thought. He says that business leaders increasingly are the stewards of civilization. Business leaders are increasingly the stewards of civilization. In his book on moral business, he makes a compelling case that the corporation has become one of the strongest institutions of our day. Here are just a few sentences of his writing. He says, families may split, but companies are enduring. Governments fall, but firms expand. The steeples of churches are being dwarfed by the towers of industry. People now say they learn more at work than at school. The corporation reaches across cultures. It transcends boundaries of nations. It serves as the predominant form of social institution. In short, businesses are coming together to produce products and services desired by some segment of the population, and they're producing them and distributing them peacefully, voluntarily, and cooperatively, unquote. This thought that business leaders are increasingly the stewards of civilization feels true to me out of my life experience, and it suggests that we need to get ready an army of competent people, moral business leaders, people of faith that can capably lead in the days ahead. For me, this journey began with the observation that my generation of business leader was, in short, embarrassing. I don't think it's an unusual thing that when you Google top 10 CEOs today, one of the articles that comes up is top 10 CEOs in prison. I'll mention 3 of my colleagues just to illustrate the point. Jeffrey Skilling, CEO of Enron, serving 24 years for fraud. Bernie Ebbers, former CEO of WorldCom, serving 25 years for fraud. Dennis Kozlowski, who my brother had the pleasure of working for at Tyco, serving 8 to 25 years for stealing $134 million. Lovely role models, aren't they? Unfortunately, our culture, and I would say our business schools, almost celebrate the self-absorbed, celebrity type of CEO who has little moral construct other than their personal ambition. It's as if Hollywood and the C-suite are one and the same. In fact, you can be trained in leadership on television by Donald Trump. It's my view that this egocentric CEO model is not producing the leaders that will steward our civilization. You may remember that Jim Collins wrote a book about this called From Good to Great in 2001. And I met him and he said he was shocked, and he used that word, he was shocked to find through academic research that the top 10 performing businesses in long-term financial performance had humble, servant-like leaders. He hadn't even heard their names before. He coined the phrase level 5 leaders for these CEOs that we have never met. Author James Sipe took this thinking a bit further in a book you probably haven't heard of called 7 Pillars of Servant Leadership. He found that when you selected companies based on their culture of servant leadership, like Toro, Service Masters, Southwest Airlines. They outperform not just the S&P 500, but they also outperform the good to great companies. Yet despite these findings, remarkably few are studying these kinds of leaders in our business books or our MBA programs. And I would suggest that there are very few business leaders that you can point to who are attempting to transform the cultures of their companies to be servant-led entities. So herein lies my premise for the conversation. God is looking for Christian business leaders who are serious about serving Him in the workplace by role modeling servant leadership and developing the next generation of leaders that will steward our civilization. And His sign-up sheet is here today in this room. This is also the premise of my work at Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen. I was unexpectedly given this opportunity to serve when I was on the board of the company in 2007 and the CEO resigned. The board asked me if I would assume this responsibility. The company was struggling, morale was not good, franchisee partnerships were worse, and the results were 7 years of decline. I talked it over with God and asked Him what He wanted me to do. And He said, I want you to sign up for some important work. I want you to develop a different kind of business leader that's ready and willing to serve with character and competence. He has some exciting plans, and I decided to come along and see what He was up to. Well, God does not disappoint. Here we are 5 years later, and this ride has been nothing short of amazing. I've been blessed with a humble, caring leadership team. We are aligned on the importance of developing a new kind of leader. And God, I think, has revealed the purpose and principles that constitute servant leadership for us. And when we have followed them deliberately, we have been blessed with a productive partnership with our owners, with growing sales, 4 years of improved restaurant profitability. We're now the fastest new unit build quick service restaurant other than McDonald's. Based on this experience, I want to share with you not so much about Popeye, but I want to share with you the journey that led me to this place of leadership. I want to encourage you through that journey to be a servant leader in the business world, developing this next generation of leaders. I mean, really, you're the HR department, right? You are in a position of tremendous influence. Don't forget that. You're in a position of tremendous influence, and God can use you right where you are to develop a new kind of leader. There's 4 findings from my journey that I'm going to share with you to help you understand how God prepares us for leadership in the workplace. 4 findings. The first one is your work actually does matter to God. Second one, your thorns, imperfections, and your trials are God's leadership boot camp. Third, the model for servant leadership is simply Jesus Christ. And fourth, God needs you and your leadership right now in the workplace. Let's start with finding number 1, your work matters to God. To figure out if work mattered, you have to examine what God says about it in His book. Now, I didn't have a theology of work until my mid-40s. I don't think I'd ever thought about the topic at all. I had not heard a sermon about it in church even. If I'd been pressed, I probably would have said work's a necessary part of life, but probably not so much on God's radar. My paradigm was shifted by reading some thought leadership books like Your Work Matters to God by Sherman and Hendricks, Business as a Calling by Michael Novak, and a seminal book by Os Guinness, The Call, Finding and Fulfilling the Central Purpose of Your Life. These readings led me to examine the Bible and see what it says about work. I have to admit I hadn't read it very thoroughly at that point. So to inspire you to dig in and read a bit more, I want to let you know the Bible has over 300 references to work. The word work in the Bible is the Hebrew word avodah. I think I said that right. It means worship. That's a provocative thought. So here are just 3 of those 300 references that are part of my work theology. Genesis 2, verse 3. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. God works. He did the amazing and profound work of creation. Proverbs 31:30 and 31. A woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. God praises us for our work. It's valuable in his eyes. Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as if working for the Lord, not for human masters. Since you know that you'll receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward, it is the Lord Christ you are serving. Simply said, God is the boss. It's him that we serve at work, none other. There are so many work and leadership stories to be discovered in the Bible. We can study the leaders of Abraham, Moses, Solomon, David, Nehemiah, Paul, and Jesus. We can learn from parables that are mostly in the marketplace. In the Gospel of Luke alone, you can read about a moneylender, Luke 7, the rich man who foolishly builds bigger barns, Luke 12, the sower in the soil, the shrewd manager, Luke 16. We can stand back then and reflect on the life and work of Jesus, the carpenter, and his followers, the disciples who were tax collectors and fishermen. Then we can walk all over the place with Paul, the tent maker. What a resource we have at our fingertips. For me, finding this biblical understanding of work, that God created it, God praises us for our work. God is our boss, and it is him that we serve. I've concluded from this study and prayer that God is working through leaders in the marketplace, and he's given each of us a job to do. It is a new perspective to go to work as a called worker of God. It's energizing. It's a little bit kind of awesome to think that you've been given a responsibility by God. I see work today as serious business in God's eyes. And so I pray for you that through the study of God's Word, you will discover or renew your understanding of work as one of God's important creations. Work is a mission field. It's a place to express the gifts and talents he's given you, and it is a place to touch lives. Finding number 2. Your thorns and trials are God's leadership boot camp. Have you experienced that? One Sunday, my pastor, Andy Stanley, said, salvation is free, but following God's call is costly. Well, I can testify to you that if God calls you to be one of his business leaders, hang on tight. You're going to be tested in all aspects of your life. God's figuring out what you can handle. Let's think about biblical leaders. God often brought them to the very end of their rope. Abraham was asked to take his son Isaac and offer him as a burnt offering. I'm glad that wasn't my test. I would have flunked. Moses cried out, "What am I to do with these Israelites? They're ready to stone me." I think I have experienced that. So anyone that God's going to use to accomplish his plan must know that God's going to test them and bring them completely to their knees. And the reason why this is 100% predictable is it's actually required to serve God. The Bible tells us that trials and tribulations will come. In James 1, blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord's promised to those who love him. Trials are the test of our commitment to God. Now, I've noticed when people like Virginia introduce me graciously that people look at my life and my success and they assume there have been no thorns or trials. So, I'm going to tell you 4 of the big ones. We don't have time for all of them. First, a thorn that would be unapparent to you. I am racked by an anxiety disorder. Now, that does not show up in my confidence and comfort up before you today, but that's not because of me. I've had an anxiety disorder for over 30 years. I've been to all the best doctors, and it's still a thorn, just like Paul's thorn. It doesn't go away. And on my own, I would be completely unable to overcome it. It keeps me on my knees. A trial. At the age of 45, which I considered young, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. My daughters were 15 and 10 at the time. And if any of you have experienced the C word, as we call it, you can attest to that tsunami-like feeling of not knowing whether you're going to be at your daughter's weddings or meet your grandchildren. And I'll be honest with you, up to that point, I'd not fully faced the fact that God determines both my birth date and my last date. For some reason, that was new information. And on my own, I couldn't overcome cancer. It brought me to my knees. Third trial. I've been fired. I won't ask you to raise your hand if you've been with me on that. I've been fired from a job I really wanted and I really loved. My efforts were not good enough. It was humiliating. It was a very public failure. The local paper ran a nice story. Failure had not been part of my vocabulary up to that point. I thought I was at the pinnacle of my career and I was put to pasture. On my own, I was devastated. It brought me again to my knees. Fourth and final trial. My husband and I adopted an 11-year-old Russian orphan in spring of 2005, believing that we could offer her some better life, only to find out that her deep, wretched, emotional wounds would prohibit her from accepting our love, and she would reject everything that we wanted to give her, including our love. God and I are still battling over this one. But on my own, I might have concluded that I was a failure as a parent to this child. So it keeps me on my knees. For you see, this is the whole point of our thorns and trials. They bring us to our knees, to a place completely beyond our human capability, where the only option is complete and utter surrender to God. We fall on our knees, and when we do so, we declare him the King. Last year, my brother-in-law went to Israel, and when he came back, he was telling me that there's actually a biblical Hebrew description of this kind of surrender. And I won't get this right, but it's called something like zeakah. And it literally means cry out to God when you're finally reduced to a desperate plea for help. In the Bible, it was usually accompanied by a wretched tearing of the beard and clothing, lying prostrate on the ground, screaming in full view of others. Been there? Zeakah is the visual image I keep in my mind of being 100% surrendered to the living God. These thorns and trials are essential preparation for God's plans and purposes. The insight is you're being prepared for God's plans and purposes, not your own. Rick Warren says it brilliantly in that first paragraph of Purpose-Driven Life. It's not about you. Big shock. The purpose of your life is far greater than your own personal fulfillment, your peace of mind, or even your happiness. It's far greater than your family, your career, or even your wildest dreams or ambitions. If you want to know why you're placed on this planet, you must begin with God. You were born for his purpose and plans. Today, I pray for you that God brings you to the end of yourself through your thorns and your trials. I pray that he will redeem them or just use them to prepare you, but that you'll be convinced to give him your 100% surrendered, undivided attention so that you can serve him and his purpose. Finding 3. The model for servant leader is none other than Jesus Christ. Once you've concluded that work truly matters to God and God has sent you to boot camp and you are 100% surrendered, then you have to examine the model he gave us for leadership. The leadership model is Jesus, and like most of the Bible, the leadership model is counter our culture and it's counter our human nature. I think Robert Greenleaf captured the difference. When he coined the term servant leadership, he talked about 2 leadership models at the extreme: leader first and servant first. Everything in our culture teaches the leader first model. It's all about power. It starts with your position. You gain power. You wield power over others. You achieve for personal gain. And you act morally only if it serves your interest. This is the leadership model we teach in school, celebrate in our magazines, and watch on TV. At the other end of the spectrum is this thing we call a servant leader, who seeks to understand the enterprise and the people and figure out what they can do to help. And they do so with integrity, honoring what is right, abhorring what is wrong, no matter what the personal cost. Greenleaf says there's only one test of a servant leader, and that is simply, are the people better off because of your leadership? I love that standard. Are the people better off because of your leadership? James Hunter, in his book, The Most Powerful Leadership Principle, puts forth the idea that Jesus has given us all the traits we must develop to be servant leaders. His leadership has impacted lives for 2,000 or more years, and in fact, he's still changing lives today. Pretty good model for leadership. Jesus defined servant leadership to the disciples when he said, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways, take up the cross, and follow me." Matthew 16. That was the first leadership class in service over self. He continues the lesson with Paul, who says in 2 Corinthians 5:15, "He died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them." He was willing to die for us, that we would no longer live for ourselves, but instead live for him. Then he gave us lots of explanations about what he meant by leadership. He meant love. I think Jesus knew that Ken Blanchard and Colleen Barrett were going to write a book. Love with leadership. He must have known that our Joel Manby from this area, has Hershend Entertainment, would publish Love Works, a leadership book about 1 Corinthians. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Then the finale, love never fails. While it's counter the leadership traits of our culture, this kind of love leadership works at the office. It's caring love, it's tough love, it's honest love, it's persevering love. Jesus teaches us the most powerful model for leadership is the heart of a servant. And he teaches us to lead in such an unexpected and distinctive way that God's people will be better off. What a responsibility it is to be called to serve God in the workplace. When I teach on servant leadership, I say this: you can never claim it to be your own. You can only aspire to be a servant leader. And to followers of Christ, I say it this way: you'll never be Jesus, but you can aspire every day to be more like him. So today I pray that you would hold yourself accountable to the aspirational leadership standard that's been provided to us by Christ, and that you would work each day to lead people to him with the loving heart of a servant. Finding 4, and the last finding. God needs your leadership, and he needs it right now in the workplace. Up till this point, I've been encouraging you in your walk, and we've talked that your work matters to God, and you're now prepared by your trials, and you're growing daily in your leadership capacity, walking in the teachings of Jesus. But now comes the part where I'm going to leave you disturbed enough to take action. I want to ask you flat out what you personally are doing to raise up the next generation of leaders that are well prepared to lead in the distinct and powerful manner of Christ. Are you committed to investing in helping God raise up a generation of leaders with character, competence, and deep-rooted faith? I work in a secular, publicly traded, global company with leaders in every continent of the world, leaders of every faith, and here is what I know for sure. The leaders have been entrusted to me for a season, and in God's view, it's a pretty short season. I'm responsible for training them, preparing them for the times that lie ahead. The brutal reality is this: today's workers don't know that their work matters because work is according to Dilbert. And Dilbert says, today you'll wear clothes you don't want to wear, you'll drive somewhere you don't want to be, and you'll do things you don't want to do. Have a nice day. It's up to us to change that worldview. We have the opportunity to treat people with dignity, to develop them with care. We have an obligation to create safe and productive work environments where people can learn and grow and perform. And by doing so, we demonstrate that work is meaningful, that it has purpose. Today's workers don't know how to navigate those thorns and trials. We need to come alongside people who are struggling and suffering and demonstrate a loving community. Help them see how real-life experiences are putting them in a position to lead others through trials and tribulations. Today's workers have no idea what servant leadership looks like. Our actions must dispel the notion that the power leader is to be celebrated. And instead, we must give awards to the quiet, humble people who deliver results. We give promotions to the ones that serve the people and the enterprise well, not themselves. And we constantly examine ourselves against this aspirational standard, acknowledging our humanness and asking forgiveness when we fall short. Today's leaders have no idea why they came to work. Help them discover that work can be purpose-driven. Through work, we can leave a legacy in the lives of people we serve. Work can be a place of authentic conversations with people who become our lifelong friends. Work can be safe and trustworthy. When we create this kind of workplace that is so different from the norm, we will be amazed at how God honors that accomplishment. It is part of his purpose and his plan. Today I pray that your hearts will catch fire for developing the next generation of purpose-driven leaders, leaders called by God to exhibit character and competence in every aspect of their lives. If you don't do it, who will? So Andy Stanley said salvation's free, but following God's call in your life is costly. If you're comfortable today, if you're well rested, if you're sitting pretty financially or ready to retire, I'm going to mess that up for you. I want you to hear his call. He needs you. He He needs leaders by the hundreds, by the thousands on every continent of the globe to train up the next generation. He's short-staffed, and God's plans are at risk without you. But it's going to cost you something to do what he asks. It does take time away from your loved ones. It does eliminate leisure time. There are risks of travel. There are relationship investments that may or may not pay out. There's exhaustion. And if you need more examples, talk to Paul. Storms, jail, chains, and death. It will cost. Leaders are called by God to leave the comfort zones behind. 2 years ago, I visited Mount Vernon, the home of our country's first president, George Washington. And I was attending this big dinner event under a tent on a beautiful night overlooking the Potomac River. There was a historian speaking about the life and work of George Washington. And it was not until that particular night that I had considered the choice that George Washington made to lead men in bloody battles to win freedom for our nation. I knew he was well known for leading his men and never leaving the battlefield. But what I didn't know is he left a beautiful home with a stunning view of the Potomac River, where he could have sat on the deck and read a book. And instead, he stepped out with purpose and courage. He did the more difficult thing. And one nation under God became a reality. In closing, I'd like to charge you to have the courage to leave your comfort zone, become a servant leader, live your life in the image of Christ, and develop the next generation of leaders for our world so that God's plan and purpose can be accomplished. I'm going to leave you with the charge that God gave Joshua on his first day on the job, right after Moses died. Tough shoes to fill. From Joshua 1:7-9, be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from the left or to the right, so that you may have success wherever you go. Meditate on my word day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, then you will have success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Thank you, and God bless.